bringing you the Awesemo Friday Fantasy Show. Manny, how we doing, man?
Good, man. Every single week we get towards Friday, there's still some news that has to come out. There's value brewing. We're here wondering whether to fade, not to fade, a bunch of questions. What stacks are the best? Are the guys that didn't perform last week going to perform this week? It's the same thing all over, but it's so much fun, man. Can't wait for Sunday.
Yeah, man. Speaking of fading, let's talk about last week real quick. Will Dissly.
Oh my gosh!
And I wrote him up, and I really thought I kind of went with your logic too. It's like he's not that good, and you can't even compare him to, let's say, Ingram or Kittle or Kelsey. But I mean, when so many people are on a tight end at 3,600. For me, he's not someone that maybe was like Wayne Gallman, who was probably the better value play, different position, but obviously guaranteed to get a lot of involvement in the offense. But man, I mean, Dissly continued to prove me wrong. And I mean, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about Dissly? Has he changed your perception by any means, especially after last night?
It's one of those situations where it's similar to last season where Austin Hooper was kind of the guy. It's going to be 5 catches for 50 yards, and it's just whether he's going to get in the end zone or not. That's really what it comes down to. And he had been the prior weeks. Last week he was still closer to min's salary, and 5 for 50 at that price tag would have been great. If he scores, even better. He ended up having, I think, 7 catches for 50, whatever, and he ended up scoring. So it's annoying because you kind of know they're going to him every down, right? And they still couldn't stop him. I get it. Arizona's horrendous stopping the tight end, so it kind of frustrated me. But you couple that with the ownership, and I was willing to take that chance every time. It's not like he has insane upside where he's just going to kill all my lineups. He really wasn't. But in the case he does fail, a lot of the field could have been gone that way. So kind of frustrating a little bit, but it is what it is. It is football. And those two guys specifically, Hooper and Dissly now, have had great seasons or great starts to the season. So pretty frustrating if you look at it that way.
I think it also showed that even though he was the chalk tight end, you didn't need him to win the Millie Maker.
For sure.
So I think, that's something where, obviously maybe it made more of a sense of a cash play, but in the Millie Maker, you did not need Dissly in order to take it down. So I think that's one sign of positivity from that outcome. Sure. Another guy that was a fade essentially to almost 99% of the DFS community was Chris Godwin. Yep. And obviously he went off. It was pretty unexpected, especially in a game where it was a completely different outcome than a lot of us had anticipated. But I wanted to ask you about Godwin. Was he someone that showed up late in crunches, or was he even someone of consideration come Sunday morning before lock?
No, not really. And I don't think anyone should have considered him really. The only way you were going to get him is if he was in your stacks, right? In your game stacks. So if you had Winston and you wanted to pair him with 2 receivers, it was obvious who you're going to pair him with. It would have been Evans and Godwin, right? If you wanted to play Jared Goff and say, go to Kupp and Cooks or Cooks and Woods or Kupp and Woods, and you wanted to run it back with someone, I think Godwin was actually a better run it back candidate than was Mike Evans, right? So I ended up going to lineup study and kind of seeing the 1% that had Godwin. And it's exactly what I said. I believe like 95% all had Godwin either in Winston stacks or coming back from Goff stacks. So it really was those guys that just wanted a game stack. And that's pretty much the only way you got him. There's no way you were going to look at the Rams defense, Tampa on the road, and say Godwin was a slam dunk. There was just no way. You did get him if you had game stacks. That's probably the only way you landed.
I feel like Godwin and Dissly were two of the big question marks from this past Sunday, but definitely Godwin, if you didn't have him, you essentially weren't winning. So it was a play where, I mean, the 1% play, it wasn't guaranteed that, he was going to get a lot of reps, but he somehow looked healthy. He torched them. And it's just one of those things. But guys, before we get into the main show, just know our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points simply by signing up through us at Awesemo.com. All you got to do is just head over to Awesemo.com, click on some of the articles. There's a bunch of new NFL articles. You can find it on the front page even of the MLB section that's still up. From there, you just click on the Daily Fantasy Sports link. Use the sign-up code Awesemo. That's AWESEMO. Manny, I want to talk to you about some questions with Fantasy Crunchers. So I had a couple people this week talk about one of the main topics, and it was quite a few people, is the same players keep showing up even after I adjust things in Fantasy Cruncher. How do I not get so many duplicates of the same players and correlations?
Yeah, for sure. That's obviously the main part of MMEing, right? If you want a massive multi-entry, you want to run hundreds of lineups. You want to run 20, 30, 40, 50 even. You don't have to go to the hundreds. You need to diversify well, right? And diversification obviously is key. And to do so in FC, there's a few ways you can do this. So I'll start off by uniques, which is the more obvious way, right? Uniques being how many unique players per lineup. Every lineup you make has to have at least X players different from the prior lineup. I like recommending 3 because 3 is probably the universal setting, right? You can use it for any sport. You can use it for 3 lineups, 4 lineups, 5 to 100, 150. You can use 3 and it'll pretty much get the job done every time. Now, if you're using certain strategies, right? If you're making groups, game stacks where a big portion of your lineup is kind of set in stone for every quarterback you're making, maybe you want to use maybe 1 less unique, right? Maybe 2 uniques, or maybe you want to have it completely different. Every single, Goff stack, you want to have completely different fillers. You can maybe go up to 4, and that could be a good way to differentiate. I suggest, and these are always exercises that I try, right? That I try not only on stream, I sit and rewind for hours, just trying to, even the dumbest thing, like what is the best amount of uniques to run in NFL? I am the type of person that'll sit there 4 hours just dissecting every single setting to find out, okay, 3 uniques is better, or 4 uniques is better, or whatever the case is, right? So that could be one way. And then for the FC Pro users, the new randomness is by far the best thing I've seen when it comes to randomness in the industry. You can set it up to 20, 30, 40%, and it's not really going to randomly pick any random player in there. You're actually still going to base everything off projections, but still get a good mix of players around your stack. So a good combination of uniques and randomness will do the trick. If you have FC Pro, I think it'll be much easier.
And that kind of leads me to another question. And this is kind of something I'm asking too. If I see too much of one player and I'm even adjusting his exposure, or I'm changing the uniques and I'm messing around with, all the different options and the advanced options, is it okay to remove that player from the pool if I just don't want to see them for quite a few crunches to see what else populates?
Yeah, for sure. So there's, so I'd say caution when doing this, right? Because I never like to eliminate. I'm the type that doesn't really cap. I know people like capping, so I'm not going to say no, but I don't like removing altogether, only because if you really projected the games the best possible way you could, right? And you have everything down packed, you didn't miss any piece of news, you didn't miss anything, the matchup is incorporated, Vegas, everything is perfect, and you still have that guy projected at, 25, and you're getting an insane amount of, Carlos Hyde or something, then yeah, that is correct, and that's how it should be. Now, if you want less of him, I say revisit the game and revisit your projection. My thing is, there should never be a player you really own 70 or 80% of the time, or 80 you have exposure to 80% of, because football is still really random, right? I know in baseball we differentiated a ton because there was so much variance in the short term. Football's kind of in the middle of basketball, where basketball is by far the most projectable sport we have in DFS, but football's somewhere in the middle. That does not mean it's still all that projectable anyway. So there is some variance in football. It's still an 11-on-11 game. There's so many moving pieces to where you can't just have even 80% of McCaffrey, even though McCaffrey will play 95% of snaps. It's things can happen in football. There's also the theory where other players can score more than your 80%er. So anytime you see a 60, 70, 80%er, I'd say revisit the projection first. And if you really think you have it down packed, look at other projection systems maybe. Ask around, see what other people haven't projected at. If you haven't projected way too high, get an average and kind of move that a little bit. But to remove them altogether, I think that might be a stretch.
So let me ask you this, and I think we can use the Rams-Bucks game as a great example. If you were on the game plan of rostering Kupp and let's just say Goff or Cooks, getting that wide receiver quarterback combo, and obviously game stacking that, you want to run it back with an opposing wideout. Well, obviously this last week, Mike Evans would have been probably the most optimal play before game time, considering the fact that We knew Godwin wasn't healthy. We knew that his projection wasn't relatively high because of that. But Evans continued to show up as that wide receiver in the grouping. Now, let me ask you this. Do you have to manually change the grouping, even though Evans would continue to show up because he's the highest projected player as far as wide receiver is concerned? How would you go about kind of negating that so that way you could see some Godwin or you can see some Howard and be able to have more shares of different players as compared to Major League Baseball, where we stack, we obviously want different correlations of that stack. And I think that's kind of something that people have struggled with NFL the first few weeks is how do I get other players opposing game stacks so that way I can have pieces everywhere?
Yeah, for sure. That's a really good question, actually. I think I covered this somewhere around 2 weeks ago, kind of working into how uniques work in Fantasy Cruncher, right? So how it works is, let's say for this example, I'm going to make 10 Goff stacks, right? And I have them with Cup, Cooks, and I don't know, if I wanted some Woods, I would have had Woods instead of Cooks, or whatever the case is. I have a 3-man stack here. I want to run it back, and we'll use the same scenario. I want to run it back with Tampa, right? You keep getting Evans. In this scenario, I have 3 uniques. How uniques work in NFL DFS is that it's a little bit unique to where we have a defense, something we don't have in any other sport, right? So if you look at everyone's projections in your lineup, it goes something like this. Your quarterback at 20, your one running back probably at 23, 22, another one maybe value at 12, 13, 14. All your receivers are 15 plus. Your tight end is at around 11, 12, 13. When you get to defense, you have a defense projected at like 7, right? So how it works is for the optimizer to still continue to produce high projected lineups, it's going to differentiate the defense by default as the first thing it removes, right? So it's already using one unique on the defense. So if you have 3 uniques, all that's actually changing from the lineup is mostly just 2 players. And if it's just 2 players, obviously it's not going to go into the stack first. It's going to change a filler. So your stack will almost always stay the same. And in the case that you game stack, the guy you're running it back with is also always going to stay the same. So for that example, I'd probably say use 4 uniques, maybe even use 5 uniques. And I know there's a bunch of top level players that currently use 5 uniques and achieve that result. So it's a weird dynamic. I think people don't realize that that's how an optimizer works. And FC is probably the best at it. And it's just doing exactly what you're making it do. It's giving you the highest projected lineup. A defense will always use a unique. And it's unfortunate because you feel like you have enough to cover your bases. And when you look at your lineups, stuff like that happens. So I'd say probably up uniques, up the randomness just a little bit. And force the stack to change every time you create a lineup.
How many unique players per lineup do you think is probably the standard or is probably the appropriate approach when utilizing Fantasy Cruncher?
So the answer I think everyone else does is about 3. I've seen anywhere from 2 to 3. The reality of that is, again, because defense always takes up a unique, is that's not enough differentiation in tournaments, right? That's not enough. So you're going to get guys 70%, 75%. And if they do well, you're like, oh, wow, I crushed. That's awesome. But if they don't do well, it's like, wow, I failed miserably. Fantasy Cruncher gave me, and it's like, well, it didn't give you anything. It's just calculating what's on your screen, right? So just studying top players. And this one takes a while because you can't, there's not a column that says how many uniques people use in lineup study, right? So you actually have to go in and do some real analysis. I've seen top players use like 5 uniques in some crunches. So that just gives you an idea of where some of the pros are and where the casual is. Not even casual, even your standard, regular 3-year player that's using FC still thinks maybe 2 and 3 is fine, which is fine if you want to take a lot of risk. Just know what you're doing, and I don't think they understand.
Someone in the chat asked, how do I get away from someone who is popping up 80% of the time?
Yeah, it's actually really tough, right? So a few things I'd recommend here first is check your projections. Almost always it has to deal with projections. For example, I don't know if last week Trey Quinn was the guy and you had him 80%. A 3K guy, even projected at 12 or 13, is going to come up a ton in your crunches because he offers a ton of value, right? I mean, it's only logical. It's part of the it's part of FC, right? To where it's going to give you those 3K guys that are projected for a lot, because then you can fit in all the McCaffreys, the Julios, the what, and that's how you create high projected lineups, right? So I'd say, again, just focus on actually projecting. I still wouldn't advise to cap, only because I don't cap. If you like to cap, sure, and obviously you just cap those guys. But for me, it's differentiate enough. Make sure you have the correct projection, because I think a lot of people don't. For example, we're going to have it this week, by the way, so I'll just spoil it before we get there. Auden Tate from Cincinnati. How much of this guy are you going to have? He's 3.5, and if you're projecting him for 10, 11, 12, you're going to have 60, 70% of him. So how do you get away from that? It's do you include him in groups? Do you not include him in groups? How many uniques? What is the randomness on this guy? If you're using randomness, what are you doing with Cincinnati? Do your rules allow you to get some Joe Mixon and Tate together? Like a bunch of stuff that comes into play. I'd say visit that and try to leave him out of as much as you can.
So Auden Tate or Trey Quinn?
None of the above. Don't make me have such a bad time.
No, I'm just kidding. For those of you that don't know, Trey Quinn has been trending on Manny's Twitch show this week, so it's been quite interesting to see. But yeah, someone wrote in the chat, no more Trey Quinn slander.
Yeah, please. No, I'm good. All right.
So someone asked, with 5 uniques, would you recommend turning off randomness?
Yes, I actually would. Not that, okay, so a couple things. If you have normal randomness, for sure, yes. If you have FC Pro and the new randomness we've incorporated, I don't think you have to turn it off. But if you want to, I wouldn't be opposed to that either. 5 uniques is a lot, right? We have, how many is it? 9 spots in NFL that we need to fill. 5 of those being unique every time is still rather different, right? So even in 5 uniques, think of it like this. It's 4 uniques for an 8-person lineup. Eliminate defense because it'll always change, right? So half of your lineup has to be different all the time. If you have a big enough pool, sure. If you have, enough quarterbacks you want to run with this, if you have enough stacks you want to play, 5 is good. I also don't think 5 is probably the way to go, but there are really notable players, like players everyone will know, that do run 5 uniques. I personally don't run 5 uniques, but I think it's an interesting strategy when you look at it and see where some of the pros are, quote unquote pros, right? Some of the high stakes guys that play hundreds and hundreds of lineups across the sites, where they're at, and maybe where we are at. Maybe merge the 2 ideas together, maybe somewhere in the middle, 3, 4. I don't know. If you want to experiment with 5, experiment first, but don't just take my word for it, right? I think that would probably be the way to go.
So someone said in the chat, why rely on a machine to build your team? What happened to using your own brain? And I think I want to just speak on this real quick. I think people should understand that you're not necessarily using a machine and that's it. You're using your brain to look at lineups in a different aspect aside from just looking at hand building. And what this does is it expands your brain essentially and your way of thinking when creating lineups. So in my opinion, when I'm using Fantasy Cruncher, I'm trying to look at different pieces of a puzzle that probably I didn't have originally to see if they fit the puzzle that I want to complete. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I could explain it in probably 10 seconds or less. I'll give you whoever said this, I'll give you the answer to the slate. I will give you everyone's actual score before it happens tomorrow, and I'll tell them, go build the perfect lineup. They won't be able to by brain. It's just, it's so hard. It's going to take them a little while. Whereas if you gave me the same information with a computer, I could do it in 1 second, right? I can build the perfect lineup in 1 second. You really can't. Now we start incorporating projections. I know they're not accurate, but it just kind of goes to show how fast I can build not just one. I can build 150. I can differentiate. There's news that breaks last second. I could still have really great lineups in a matter of minutes. I can set rules to do all of this. If you're making 5, 10, 15 lineups by hand, sometimes you don't notice how many of the same defenses you've used, which is a flaw. I mean, there's so many things, right? But essentially, it comes down to this. If I gave you all the actual scores for what's happening tomorrow, it's going to take you quite a little bit. You might not even get there. You might not even make the perfect lineup, to where I definitely can with a machine or whatever you want to call it. I don't know. I'd say it's a no-brainer if you can use FC effectively rather than doing everything by hand, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know about Fantasy Cruncher or if you've never used it, well, guess what? you can use the sign-up code NFL Strategy, get 50% off your first month with Osmo Plus. All you got to do for anyone in here, go to osmo.com/join. Check out the new NFL landing page. It's pretty awesome because it's got videos that describe each package. So you essentially know what you're getting before you buy it. You get all the access to all the tools developed and used by our boss man, the number one player in the world himself, Osmo. So go check it out. NFL Strategy, 50% off your first month, and use the code Osmo. That's AWESEMO and the plus sign. All right, so we're going to go into this main slate. A lot of interesting games, and I'm excited to kind of break a few things down. First game we got going, Manny, is Cardinals-Bengals. Bengals 3-point favorites, over under 47. Got some plays in here that we just spoke about as far as Tate, maybe Mixon. Also want to talk about the Cardinals side of the ball. So let's break this down, Manny. How do we feel about this game?
Yeah, problem number one on Sunday's slate is this game already. So it's actually perfect that we get to it first. So many moving pieces, and I'll go through all of them. I'll start off with Mixon first, right? Because I think that's probably one of the better plays on the slate, or at least one of the safer plays. We saw the volume last week. It grew just a tad bit, right? 20 touches, and he finally got into the end zone. I'm not saying they were efficient. I'm not saying he did well in those touches. But he's starting to develop some sort of a floor after the first 2 weeks where they were behind by so much. They lost 41-17 to San Fran, and he was virtually invisible, right? So now he gets something at least. At least he scored last week, so we have something. But he's 6'1", right? Compared to the 6'7" he started, at least on DK. Across the industry, he's extremely cheap, or way cheaper than he was to start the season. So you can look at Mixon. The real problem is Auden Tate, right? And it goes back to what we spoke about last week. It's, do we play him? Do we not play him? Is he a price play? What is his real projection? And do we include him, for those that are making groups, do we include him in our groups? And it's going to change a ton because it's a 3K guy. So look how this works, and I'll try my best to explain it. If you input Tate into your groups, right, and you're stacking him with Dalton, since he's so cheap and he's going to fulfill all your stack requirements, you are going to get one more Andy Dalton. You're probably, if you include Mixon, you're going to get more Mixon. And obviously you're going to have a ton of Auden Tate because outside of the stack, he's still a really good value play, right? So there's so many moving pieces here to where I don't want to say he is the best value play or just everyone has to lock him in because it's football. We all know how that works, but he is a really big question mark as of right now. He's an outlier in most people that have crunched so far, and I'd say let's revisit this. Let's see how, if we add him to groups, if we want him with Mixon in the lineup. A bunch of moving. I say we analyze this for sure, and then factor in whether the ownership is worth it or not. That's my thing.
All right, I'm going to go against you on this one with Tate, and I like him more on FanDuel because obviously he's just so much more chalkier on DraftKings, but I feel based on what we've seen the last two games that he's kind of stepped into this number 2 role as someone who has kind of built a foundation the last 2 games, and he's not just someone calling in and it's next man called up. And what I mean by that is he had 10 targets in week 3. He had 6 targets last week against Pitt. But in these 2 contests, he also led the Bengals in receiving yards. So it's almost as if that the relationship with him and Dalton is there. And with Ross now gone, Tate was already playing over 90% of the snaps. And so someone's got to catch the ball. And to be quite honest with you, when you look at this depth chart, it's just Boyd and Tate. I guess you can factor in Damian Willis if you want to, but it seems as if that in this matchup, especially if Arizona plays to the pace that they normally play, this could be a situation where, Tate could essentially, I like him way better than, let's say, a Trey Quinn or let's say a Paul Richardson in this situation, because they are going to throw the ball. They're not necessarily running it as much as I would anticipate, especially Bernard. He's just nowhere to be found. So I feel like Tate is in a great spot here, and he's just so cheap that it's really hard to kind of disfactor that. But I guess at the end of the day, too, we've got to focus on maybe this is more of a cash game play, because in a GBP game or a GBP play, you want to play good players. And I'm not going to say that Tate is an outstanding player, but I do feel like this makes more sense than Trey Quinn last week.
Yeah, for sure. So a few things to note here, and this is what I think can help most out, right? If you're getting a lot of Auden Tate, I think you're correct, and I think he is the right play. How much of Auden Tate is the question, right? So if you look at weeks 1 and 2 for Cincy, where he didn't have good games, predictable, right? He didn't play week 1. Week 2, I think he played 30% of snaps or so. He played 36% of snaps, and then week 3 and 4 he played 90 plus, right? Weeks 3 and 4 are pretty weird because they're starting to mimic the Rams offense as much as they can, right? Running those 3 receivers with one tight end and one running back, right? So assuming, or at least because the coaching staff did come over from, or one of them came from the Rams, right? And he was under McVay, so he knows exactly how they run their offense. If that's the case, all 3 receivers that play have actual upside. We're seeing it every single day with the Rams, right? So by default, Tate has some value. Now that Ross is gone, first, someone is also going to step up into that role. I assume they're not just going to, scrap their whole offense because someone's out. Someone's going to also see 90% of snaps, I think, now. But Tate is almost solidified to play 95% of snaps. There's just no other way around it, right? If that's the case, look at his 2 weeks of 90% snaps and more, right? They're so solid, extremely. 10 targets 1 week, 6 targets the next week. And that's that they didn't score anything against Pittsburgh last week. If you like that and you want another 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 targets at 3-5, phenomenal. You also couple with they're at home and they play Arizona, which is arguably one of the best matchups in the league. It's a slam dunk. It just comes down to ownership for me, and that's always a tricky part in tournaments.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're right. I mean, if he's 50, 60% on, let's just say, it's kind of an area where you want to have maybe a little bit under the field, because if he does be a complete bust, you're already now gaining an edge on that percentage of the field. So I definitely understand that. And that makes a lot of sense. So I think, maybe the way moving forward with this over the next 2 days is looking at the ownership, not saying that, you got to fade him. But, for me personally, I think it's a great play. But I also agree with you that if he is that high, maybe I don't want to be as high with the field, because then that could hurt me rather than help me.
Sure. I think you're spot on. It's just a matter of preference at that point, right? I think it's exactly what you want to do, whether you don't like, how you want to run it, all this stuff. But all in all, Tate is a fine play.
Okay. And then I guess on the other side of the ball, we didn't even look at it, but David Johnson, I feel, is in a very great spot. I mean, he's playing 90% of the snaps right now. The Bengals have no rush D. I mean, we've seen that in multiple games this year, especially against teams that just continue to run the ball with 2 different running backs or 3, as we saw with the 49ers as well. Any love for David Johnson or any love for anyone on the Cardinals offense?
Yeah, only because they play so fast, right? And the whole DJ thing is kind of annoying because the work is there, like 20 plus touches 2 games in a row. I think that's huge, right? And anytime you have not only a team playing at this pace, but a guy that sees 20 touches, you'd think the upside is through the roof, but he's only had, in those last 2 games, he's had over 20 points just last week, right? 21.9. So I think something's got to give, and this might be the week. These are 2 really bad teams, you want to say, right? And someone has to come out on top. I'd say it is the Cardinals, but and if they do, it has to be DJ. I think the receiving core in Arizona, little by little, getting way too injured for Kyler Murray, and then what is Kyler doing with no receivers out there now, right? Just passing to Fitzgerald only. We're seeing a lot more work for DJ in the passing game, and that's always reassuring. So
yeah, and that's huge upside for DraftKings, especially with the PPR. So he doesn't have the carries there, but he makes up for it with the pass catching opportunities. So I'm on board with you there. Another game, next game actually, Bills-Titans. This is probably not DFS exciting, although the Titans did weird things this past week. Tennessee 3-point favorites, over under 38.5. Are we looking at this game at all?
This is ugly, man. You can't pick any 2 worst team. Well, I guess you can, but the total doesn't even reach 40. It's the only total that doesn't reach 40 on the main slate. This is by far the worst game of the week, and it's not even close. Maybe if you wanted Henry, for me, it's not even. Don't even bother.
Yeah, I don't.
The only thing, like Henry carries it so many times per game, but imagine this: he needed 27 carries to hit 100 yards, and he had 100 on the dot. He didn't go a yard over. I mean, that's.
I mean, the thing with Tennessee is they drag the clock out. So,
sure.
This not only slows down the game, but it limits the opposing offense to even have opportunities to move the ball themselves. So, when Derrick Henry is averaging these many carries per game, that clock is just trickling down. And so, from a DFS perspective, it's not helping. It's only hurting. And I think this is what we saw the last couple of weeks, especially with the Falcons, not having enough time even to move the ball. So, yeah, 38.5 over under, it doesn't do anything for me. So I'm in agreement with you. I don't really see any plays here outside of maybe some shares of Henry if you're, doing max entries. Bears Raiders. Now, this game is being played in London. It's got 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Usually they play this game earlier, but it's going to be on the main slate. Now, historically, we've seen games in London high scoring, right? We've seen a lot of points. I don't know. Maybe the theory is they want to just give London an excitement and all this stuff. Over-under is only 40, though. As we know, Bears have an incredible defense. We've seen that the last couple of weeks, especially last week against the Vikings. 5.5-point favorites, over-under 40. I don't know, man. A lot of people in chat earlier were talking about Montgomery being a great play here. We saw an uptick in his attempts this past week. Ground and pound mentality. No one else really taking shares from him. How do we feel about this game?
Yeah, I actually, like, if it was just Trubisky and how bad Trubisky had been, I'd say this is probably accurate. It's going to sound weird, but does Chase Daniel even make the offense a little bit better? Like, I'm not saying Trubisky, he's a better player than Trubisky, but Trubisky hadn't done anything this year. And it was like frustrating at times to watch him, right? I know he was never he was never going to be this incredible NFL QB, not after what we saw last season, right? But I didn't think he'd start off the season this bad, but I don't know. For me, it's who if it's not Montgomery, how does any of this game unfold, right? That's my thing. Like, Oakland is always horrendous, and I hate everything about Oakland except Darren Waller, which I think you can probably go to here. Outside of that, I'm not interested in Tyrell Williams. I'm not interested in Josh Jacobs. I'm not interested in Derek Carr. I'm not, like, it's just such a tough matchup for everyone on the Oakland side. And then if that's the case, because Oakland's offense is not good enough to begin with, it's fair to say that Chicago will have a lead. They are 5-point favorites despite the total, and it should be a lot of David Montgomery. And if that's the case, yeah, I think he's probably a top 5 running back when you have to incorporate price, making him, pretty solid value, I think.
Let me ask you this. There's also been some talk about Jacobs, and I think Montgomery, based on what I've seen out of the Raiders, especially the last couple weeks, I like Montgomery, but I want to be hesitant as well because the Raiders aren't necessarily giving up those big time plays that I would like to see out of the running backs. However, though, Jacobs is kind of interesting. Jacobs is, I forget on DraftKings, I think he's in the 5,000s. Is that correct?
He is, I have him here. He is 4,500.
All right, 4,500. They seem to have changed the game plan a little bit. Last week, got more attempts, getting pass catching opportunities. At 4,500, I feel like this game, they're going to be behind. And I feel like that they're going to need to, get the ball moving somehow. But then on the other side of the contrary, I feel like they're going to try to ground and pound it and not necessarily throw as much. And I don't know how I feel about Jacobs. I'm trying to figure this out right now. But at 4,500, I feel like he's somewhat of an interesting play. And I don't know if I'm looking at it the wrong way or not. And I want to just get your insight on it to see if this is even of value, or could we go Jacobs depending upon the narrative of how this game script goes. But I feel like sometimes at 4,500 with the opportunities and the role that he plays in the offense, it could be somewhat interesting.
If you truly think he has pass catching ability, then sure, it makes sense. But for me, I don't know. 2 receptions for 29 probably isn't going to, move the needle for me. It's also a game script where I think they fall behind more times than not. And it could be a game where it's just Chicago again dominating through defense. just being conservative on offense, running the football, not turning the ball over. If that's the case, it's going to be really hard for Jacobs to get there, let alone have tournament winning upside for me, right? So for me, it's pretty much just Montgomery from this game. If I wanted Waller to kind of come back, they're down so much, and they need to pass the rest of the way. I think Darren Waller's my favorite only because the volume has been there every single week. Like, he's giving you wide receiver production. If he's not the guy, then yeah, I can't. For me, I just can't with Jacobs. There's so many other running backs on the slate that I think have not only a great matchup, the price tag is fair, the upside is through the roof. Jacobs for me, just I can't get there.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with you. When I see 4,500 and I see someone who's at least ran 17 attempts out of 4 games, I just try to look at to see, is there any value there? Is this a play that I could at least sprinkle a few shares across 150 lineups? And pretty much that's it when I look at that situation. Not saying that he's a great play, just saying that it's interesting because he is so cheap, but it is a difficult matchup, and I just wanted to see what you thought about that play. Buccaneers Saints, completely different game than what we've seen over the last 2 games that we just discussed. Buccaneers seem to be some type of crazy offense last week, scoring 55 points, which is insane. Saints, on the other hand, held the Dallas Cowboys in a very defensive matchup, really limited the passing game of Prescott. A lot of talk here about Winston and the wide receivers. I like the Saints D in this matchup. Saints 3-point favorites over under 47. Let's talk about this game and break this down.
Yeah, for sure. If Breeze was playing, you'd say this is probably the game of the week, right? This will most likely be a shootout according to Vegas. Playing in the Dome is always, I feel like it's the Coors. We always say it's the Coors Field of the NFL. Like, the total would probably be 50, especially when Winston and the boys are coming off a win like they did last week, right? So to see this even at 46 and a half, still a bit surprising, but I understand, right? It's not Breeze, it's Bridgewater, and how good can Bridgewater be? Can Bridgewater even run up the score, right? So for me, if I'm game stacking, it's going to be Jameis to the same 2 guys. If you want to include O.J. Howard somehow, then by all means, do whatever you want, right? But not there. You can't really include anyone else. For me, it's only Mike Evans and Godwin. And if that's the case, who do you run it back with? I think it always has to be one, because now with Bridgewater, it's been Michael Thomas or Kamara, right? It's always been one or the other. Bridgewater just doesn't have enough firepower in that arm to put up 35 points and have them both go ham, especially when both are priced like pretty good players at their position, right? So I think everyone by default is going Michael Thomas because he's the cheaper out of the bunch, but he has the upside, but Kamara's still there, right? And although it's a price thing for a lot of people, I'm saying to just forego the price and just play Kamara if you really want to. Kamara's in a fine spot. I think it's only one. But I can't play them both. And if I'm playing Bridgewater, I'm not. But you better hope for a miracle at this point. He seems like a game manager while he's out there, right? I think he's just a game manager right now. If that's the case, then you can only play one of Kamara and Thomas at a time. Play Winston and hope his stack goes ham. If it doesn't, that's what game stacks are. I just didn't get there.
Let me ask you this, though. From a Kamara play, are you focused more on the catches and the yards after catch type of situation? Because the running game isn't necessarily there for the Saints right now. So with Kamara, I mean, you're relying on his catches, his production in the pass catching downs. And so are you looking at it from that standpoint? And also with Thomas, I feel like his upside has been limited a little bit because of now Bridgewater being the quarterback. So I'm hoping that rapport kind of changes because his receptions and targets have gone down since Breeze and went down as well. So, but I like Thomas because, obviously big time receiver. I'm looking for the bigger plays though with Thomas, not just these 8-9 yard catches because it gets frustrating. I would like to see some, over 10, 15 yard plays. And I'd also like to see him targeted in the red zone more. So far, he has one red zone target the last 2 games with Bridgewater, and he even had only one red zone target with Breeze as well. So as far as big as he is, they need to look for him more in the red zone. I don't know if you agree with me or not on that.
Yeah, for sure. Touchdowns are king, right? You need touchdowns to have big fantasy days, and he's just not getting them right now. Doesn't mean he's a bad play by any means, right? I think he's still a solid lot to see his, I don't know, hopefully 10 targets. If he could get 8 to 10, I think that'd be fine. And then if he gets in the end zone, it'll be sweeter, especially for that. He's 6'6", right? We saw him to start the season at 8K, right? And it's just because it's Breeze or was Breeze, doesn't mean he should be 6'6" now because it's Bridgewater, right? So for me, it's you still have the upside a little bit. Just 6'6" is probably still too cheap, even with Bridgewater in there.
Okay, and then on the Kamara side, how do you feel about is it more of the pass catching game rather than the running game? And hold on one second, I got to charge my laptop because it's about to die. So hold on one second.
Sure. For me, Kamara, you have to kind of still play Kamara, right? It's not like he's not going to do anything. He's still being extremely efficient, right? He's still being extremely efficient. I think he left there. Anyway, I'll keep going. I think it's just he's still efficient. He's still getting 4.5 yards per carry these games, right? And 16 to 17 carries, I think, is still solid. The passing game upside, he could have either 9 receptions, he could have 3. I think it's the upside you get with Kamara. And then if you're running it back with these guys, it's Kamara's kind of game script proof, right? To the point where it can be them with the lead, and then it can be him running out the clock. It could also be them coming from behind and Kamara in the passing game. So do I have you live, Josh? Is that
what are we talking about? Something about Alvin Kamara? I don't know.
Yeah. I'm here spewing off about Alvin Kamara. I think he's still a fine play. I don't think you fade him at all. I assume we'll get Chris back soon, but even if I love this game, I think it's kind of hard to piece it in together when factoring in price, but you can still do it for sure.
He's back.
My bad, man. My bad. Okay. I realized that it was dying, and I was like, "Oh, dude, I got to put in the charger."
Sorry, it's all good. No, I just went on about Kamara. I think he's kind of game script proof in the sense that if they're up, he can run the football. If they're behind, obviously there's upside for catches. It just I feel like it's really tough for it to be both of them, him or Michael Thomas at the same time. Pick one, and I think you'll be okay.
Vikings Giants. Vikings 5-point favorites, over under 43.5. We've seen the Giants the last 2 weeks. A lot of different questions. I mean, we got Daniel Jones now being somewhat of a great quarterback. Wayne Gallman stepped up and, surprisingly was not as owned as I originally thought he would be, and, completely went off. Now, we can justify that because he had red zone reception and also a 1-yard touchdown as well. But this game is interesting from both sides of the ball. And there's some interesting things going on with the Vikings right now with Stephon Diggs and Thielen with some turmoil against Kirk Cousins because that passing game is just nowhere to be found. I mean, I think Kirk Cousins is the lowest quarterback when it comes to attempts so far this year at only 99. He hasn't even broke 100 yet through 4 games. What do you think about this matchup, Manny? And are you looking at any plays from both sides of the ball here?
Yeah, this is a weird one because you know where the production is coming from on the Giants side, but it's such a tough matchup that it probably doesn't even matter here, right? Like the whole Gallman thing last week, kind of another one that I got wrong where I kind of knew what the volume was. It was just, could he get in the end zone or not? And he did. He fell into the end zone. He wasn't even efficient. He wasn't good with his volume. He got to the end zone and he ended up having a good fantasy day, relative to his price. But for me, this is a really, really tough matchup. And then on the other side, would you even use Thielen and Diggs when Dalvin Cook is running that well? Like, they don't even need them. So, listen, I get it's frustrating because as a receiver, you want all the catches in the world. But when you have probably through the first 4 weeks, the best running back in the league behind you, there really is no need, right? Kirk Cousins did have a 10 pass attempt game because Dalvin Cook was running circles around the defense. Like, if that continues to play out, and listen, this week is another really good matchup for these guys. They can score in any way. When Dalvin's running that good, how do you even turn to do anything else? So it's frustrating if you keep rostering Diggs or Thielen, but I mean, you have an all-world running back right now the way he's running back there. So I probably wouldn't change. I'm staying away from this game as much as I can.
Wow. Okay. I personally like Diggs and Thielen this week. And sure. The reason why is because, one, high upside, low ownership.
Sure.
Priced appropriately. And I feel like this is the game where they need to throw the ball more to make their wide receivers happy. I mean, bottom line, especially if they're going to be in contention to win and make the playoffs, you need a culture of happy guys here. And obviously we know Cook has been incredible this year. And I love Cook as a play here. I think he is the best play for the Vikings in this matchup. But also looking at it from a different perspective as well, I mean, you have two wide receivers here that are going to go up against a really bad pass defense.
Right.
And against DeAndre Baker, one of their number one corners, who has been getting torched this year. I mean, outside of that, Janoris Jenkins as well. So these two guys alone, I think, have given up over 500 yards and 3 or 4 touchdowns, I believe. And I mean, a combined passer rating of, I think, over 105, 106. And if there's any game where Kirk Cousins could redeem himself and at least prove to us that he's still a passing quarterback, I feel like this is that game. So I do like this play just because there is potential there. These aren't two guys that we don't know if they have skill sets or if they don't know if they're big play guys, because they are, and they can catch the ball. So I like it. I'm going to look into it more, but just from 2 days out of the main slate, I feel like that's a good play. And on the other side of the ball, I wanted to get your take on something very interesting. Barkley is 4,500 on FanDuel. Okay,
I don't know why they do that.
It doesn't make any sense. It does because one, it's going to mess with people's minds, and I mean, I don't think it's fair whether you're experienced or whether you're a beginner to DFS. And we don't have the news yet. He's full participating right now in practice. Okay, he's also, I don't know, I think you posted it. He's wearing these outfits and going to these gala events and these fashion shows. The guy is healthy. All right, he's not needing a rehab. I don't know what's going on, but he looks healthy. He's participating. He could play. And at 4,500, if all of a sudden it breaks out, I mean, how much percentage owned will he be on FanDuel?
I mean, 4,500 for top 3 back in the league. I mean, what do you say? I know it's a matchup thing, and that's why people still probably be hesitant. They don't know how much he'll play, all this stuff, but I don't care who he plays at that price tag, right? I don't care. I mean, if it's a healthy Saquon and he goes in with the same volume, how on earth do we not play him at that price, right? It's one of those things where, remember they speaking FanDuel, I forget what year they did, where in MLB they priced someone at like $2 by accident. And it's like, well, okay, this is like the mega game theory move, because like someone is literally free. Do we play them or not? It's almost that same scenario, because Saquon at 45 doesn't make any sense. That's obviously a wrong move. I hate when someone gets injured and they assume they're just not going to play and they put him at 4,500. What does it hurt to just leave him at the 8,000 he is every week? No one's playing him anyway, so just leave him at 8,000. That way, in the rare case he does play and he is healthy, nothing changes. Yeah, dumb move on their part, and here we are talking about a close to min salary Saquon Barkley that can possibly play while healthy. That's ridiculous.
I think another thing to take in consideration is this team is 2-2. Okay,
sure.
So I mean, they're in the mix right now, and I'm sure that they probably think that they can win this matchup. And so I mean, at the end of the day, too, Wayne Gallman, he's not practicing. He's been limited. He's got a neck injury. So you mean to tell me if Wayne Gallman somehow becomes doubtful, that we're not going to see an increasing spike in the opportunity that Saquon Barkley plays? I mean, it just, if they were 0-4 right now, no way we would say that Saquon plays, because at that point, there's just nothing to play for. But at 2-2, and I mean, you're in the mix right now in your division, because I mean, Dallas did just lose. I mean, you're 1 game back. Why would you not even, kind of entertain the thought that, okay, if we win this game, I mean, we could be tied for the division come the end of this week. So, I mean, they're in the mindset right now where they can win. And if Gallman doesn't play, I don't see how they don't play Saquon.
Yeah, for sure, 100%, especially at that price tag. I never recommend the lock button, but my goodness, man, Saquon lock sounds really good, man.
Jets and Eagles, next game, 43 over-under. Philadelphia, 14-point favorites. We just saw today, I think it was announced that Djax will miss his 3rd straight game. Any love for the Eagles passing game against this weak Jets secondary?
Weak Jets everything. Like they're not going to score. They're not going to score on the other side either. Zach Ertz has to be the guy. Listen, the thing for Zach Ertz for me is he's such a good player, and everyone knows it. And when guys are out in this Eagles offense, they know Zach Ertz is the guy, and they start doubling Zach Ertz. And every time I watch those games and I see, another bracket coverage on Ertz, it's just like, this is frustrating because I roster this guy and like teams are just doubling him every single down. It's annoying. So outside of that, I think he's, again, a phenomenal play. If you wanted to go to – actually, I'm not going anywhere else. It's just Zach Ertz for me. From the Jets side, I think running it back with pass catchers seems okay. If you wanted to go Le'Veon, I don't know, even Robbie Anderson, Crowder, I think that's fine, assuming they trail. This could be a sneaky game stack. I just have to hope it's Ertz scoring the touchdowns for the Eagles.
So I agree with you about the sneaky game stack, and I wanted to ask you, if you wanted to stack Wentz, Alshon, and Ertz, which wide receiver would you have most confidence in playing from behind on the Jets side?
I think everyone's initial answer should be Crowder, right? But I think Robbie Anderson for me is the guy I do want. Again, has the home run ability, and sooner or later it's going to give. I just hate that they have really no quarterback. Darnold has been ruled out for week 5 already, and it's frustrating because that quarterback play has been horrendous no matter who it is in there. So something's got to give eventually. Just throw it up to Anderson, see what could happen. That's what I'm hoping for.
My thought was if Darnold played, I think Crowder would be absolutely in play if you're looking for a running back or a wide receiver to run it back against a stack. However, though, you mentioned a great point. Their quarterbacks are horrible. I don't feel as if that the Jets wideouts could get the production we're looking for from these quarterbacks. So I'm kind of just thinking the stack and stack only in this situation and nothing more as far as the Eagles side. And I like the Eagles defense.
Sure. Fair enough. Yeah, that works.
Ravens Steelers 44.5 over under. Baltimore 3.5 point favorites. This game's going to be interesting. We just saw the Steelers smash mouth the Bengals. I mean, their defense looked way better than what we've seen earlier this year. Ravens struggled against the Browns, against the run game, and Lamar Jackson was kind of contained. I mean, he had a long pass to Snead, had some rushing yards, but I mean, Marquise Brown was the biggest probably disappointment. He did nothing last week. How do we feel about this game, Manny? How do we look at both sides?
Yeah, it's kind of weird because we saw the Steelers run this like hybrid wildcat type thing where it actually wasn't a rush at all, and it was just like a flip on every play. So all of these things were like catches, right? To the point where Samuels had 8 catches for 57 yards, and then James Conner had also another 8 catches for 83 and a touchdown. So if it's going to be that easy in PPR sites, no matter who they play, this all of a sudden becomes extremely interesting because did you see that statistic where Mason Rudolph's average, I think it was average depth of target, was like behind the line of scrimmage? It was literally a flip forward every single play. So if that's the case, you have to look at some of these backs. And you could look at James Conner and Samuels from the same team if you wanted to. I think the guy I want to stay away from, though, is Juju because he hasn't done anything, right? I don't know what the deal is. I get it. Big Ben's injury hurts him a ton, and Mason Rudolph just really isn't throwing it that much downfield. But and they're really not involving Juju at all. It feels like pretty easy to game plan against him. I don't know. I'd stay away from everything outside of these running backs. And then if you wanted to go Lamar Jackson, of course, Marquise Brown and Mark Andrews are always in play.
I think what we need to realize with Juju is the fact that last year he had Antonio Brown. He wasn't the number 1 wide receiver. The attention wasn't on him. The attention was on how do we focus on stopping Antonio Brown, which opened up the field for Juju more, which opened up more one-on-one opportunities, which opened up everything for him. However, though, this year, you're the number 1 wideout, Juju. Attention's on you. The game plan is to how to stop you and let the other guys go. They don't have anyone else right now. They don't have the same correlation last year of Antonio Brown and Juju. They have Juju and Deontay Johnson, Dante Moncrief. I mean, he's horrible. So it's tougher for Juju this year to produce. And now even with Big Ben out, it's even worse. So yeah, I feel like Juju right now is irrelevant with fantasy because of this situation. It's not worth his price point, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's actually frustrating because for a little bit there, you were paying top dollar for Juju and he was just not performing at all. So frustrating. Stick with the backs. It looks like that's part of their game plan going forward.
We got a couple more games. We'll speed it up a little bit, Manny. Patriots, Redskins, 42.5 over under. Patriots, 15.5 point favorite. # Trey Quinn season. Is this it?
No, that doesn't exist. Probably the number one defense so far through the first 4 weeks. This is as tough a matchup as it gets for the Redskins. It's an easy matchup again for Tom Brady. He has like the easiest schedule every year. It's so annoying. The AFC East sucks. He has a free 6 games every time, and then when you have games like Washington on your schedule, then you're favored by double digits every single week. So it's frustrating. How do they score? They can score any way they want. Every time that's the case, I have a hard time going to the team because it can be the running game, it could be the passing game. I've heard Dorsett's name. I've heard everyone. Michelle, Burkhead. I've heard every single bro. Even the backups, the injury players could probably all get in the end zone, man. So I don't know. It's frustrating when that's the case, especially when I have no one to run it back with. I kind of steer clear of the game. I really have nothing from this one. I don't want to start guessing.
Yeah, I agree with you. Patriots, we don't know where the production will go, where it will come from. Sony Michel has been very weird with how he's been used through 4 games. And then the passing game is spread out everywhere. Redskins do have a horrible pass defense, though, so I feel like maybe Edelman, if he plays, could be somewhat interesting on FanDuel. He's pretty cheap. He's $6,500. Definitely, I feel like he could hit value. Outside of that, not really liking anyone on the Redskins. What I saw this past week was atrocious, especially playing against the Giants D. That's not even good. They made the Giants D look incredible. So big pass on that. Jaguars Panthers next game. 3.5-point favorites for Carolina. 41 over under. McCaffrey for me and nothing more. How do you feel?
Yeah, McCaffrey and keep going, by far the highest volume out of anyone in the league. It's not even close. I think he's missed 4 snaps all season so far. When that's the case, that's the highest floor in the league, and I don't think anyone even rivals it. So yeah, all the McCaffrey you can. You'd argue that it's not the easiest matchup, but still with that much volume, it doesn't even matter almost. If you wanted to play Kyle Allen and maybe pair Samuel and I don't know, maybe some DJ Moore, some Olsen, I'm not opposed to that, but it's going to be a lot of McCaffrey for me. On the other side, I'm kind of staying away from Leonard Fournette. I don't think one game is enough to get me there. That was almost 30 attempts in that game, and I do not think he averages 8 yards per carry again. So, for me, it's I'll kind of stay away from the Jaguars. It's going to be all McCaffrey for me.
Fournette, maybe, just because of a volume perspective. He's still somewhat cheap. We saw what he did last week, racked up over 200 yards. Used heavily in the offense, 84% of the snap shares. He's really the only one running back that they utilize. Falcons, Texans, over under 49. We got 2 more games left, Manny. 4-point favorites for Houston. This game, 49 over under. What am I seeing here? Because I feel like this is the week that Hopkins finally goes off.
Yeah, about time, right? Haven't been season long, hasn't done anything. It's a good matchup, I'd say, for both sides, right? And you're looking at the Atlanta passing D, and it's atrocious, rank in the bottom third of the league. You look at Houston, and although they're a little bit better, they are, but I still think it has to come down to can you finally score? Can Julio get in the end zone? Can Matt Ryan? Can you score? Because the yards have been there, right? The yards have been there for Matt Ryan. It's just he can't piece it together. Last time out, he had almost 400 yards, just 0 touchdowns. Didn't even turn the ball over. So it was just they couldn't finish drives. I don't think the variance plays out that way. And if he finishes drives, we could be looking at another 25-point fantasy point game like he did in the first 3 weeks. If that's the case, I absolutely love that. You compare him with Julio, pretty much whoever you want in that passing game. Hooper, pretty interesting as well, too.
I want to mention Calvin Ridley is 5,400 on FanDuel. And I really like this opportunity for Ridley in this matchup. Obviously Julio Jones gets the attention. Mohamed Sanu has kind of stepped up, and obviously we've talked about Hooper just being a target monster for Matt Ryan this year. But, we've seen Texans kind of struggle in some games with the passing defense. And, I think this is a game that could open up the field for Ridley. He's a big play guy. Didn't get much love last week as far as opportunities, so I feel like maybe this is a bounce-back game. Outside of that, though, I agree with you. I think Hopkins, this is the game for him to really go off and finally, put his foot into this season. Broncos, Chargers, 44.5 over under. Chargers 6-point favorites. Oh, Melvin Gordon, he's going to play. But I'm not going to lie. This is the game where I feel like Eckler's not going to be owned much because of that, or not owned as much. And I like Eckler still.
Yeah, I mean, he's played so well the first 4 weeks. Like, how do you even sit him just because Melvin Gordon's back? And I know the whole coach speak thing about when Melvin comes back, he's going to be our running back. He's still our starter or whatever. But man, look at how well Eckler has played. By any metric you look at, he's been outstanding. I don't know how you sit him. So yeah, I think a timeshare is what we're looking at here. But if that's the case, one, how do you play Gordon? And then two, at the price tag, how do you play Eckler? That's the only thing for me. So it's kind of difficult. I'm also not going to say this is the easiest matchup for them, but I want someone from here. I just don't know who. I think I'd rather stick with Keenan Allen. I know what his volume is no matter what happens in the backfield, and double-digit targets at the wide receiver position, always something I'm looking for. So probably Keenan, my favorite out of anyone. And then on the other side, Broncos are always so tough to trust, man. Not even Lindsey is one you could look at for me because he'll have a 30-point game and then he'll go back to 7 on less than 10 carries. So just kind of stay away if you wanted some, I don't know, someone to run it back. Maybe Manny maybe Cortland Sutton, maybe, I don't know. For me, it's just going to be Keenan Allen for the most part. Probably not a game stack I'm in love with.
Yeah, I feel like the Broncos, they don't necessarily have an identity. And that's really hard to move forward with in DFS. And I mean, maybe Sutton could be interesting if they're down much. Sure. The Broncos are not good. And so I feel like the Chargers could run away with this here. But when it comes to Gordon, I feel like I'm looking at maybe 10 carries. And I feel like Eckler will be using the passing downs. But I feel like you can't go away from the hot hand. You just can't do that to him. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of approach this. Last game, Manny, Packers, Cowboys, 47 over-under. Dallas 3.5-point favorites. I don't know, man. I like Zeke here. Out of this game, I haven't looked at too much from the Packers side, but I like Zeke. How do you feel about this game?
Yeah, Zeke, it looks like he's back to normal workload, right? And if they're ahead, which, again, we project them to be ahead according to Vegas in this one, you think he'd have 25 touches. If that's the case, you have to look there. He's going back to normal pricing too. Not 8-9, at least not on DK, but I think you can go there. Solid to play. It comes down to, do you like Zeke over McCaffrey? You really can't play them both unless you're just going to hold hands and use the same value as everyone else. So that's probably the only tough part. As far as receivers is concerned, Cooper, I think, is okay, tournaments only. And then maybe from the opposite side, I don't even have a play here. I'd say Adams, sure, but not even for me. I really have nothing outside of Zeke, maybe some Amari Cooper shares, but it's not a game I love at all.
Yeah, I like Zeke and really nothing more. I feel like this game will kind of just be more defensive than offensive. So I'm kind of going down that route too. Before we close out, Manny, people just randomly were talking in chat. I know you got to go. Will Fuller is being talked across the DFS industry on everywhere that people are saying that he's a lock this week. Is this true?
Yeah, top 5 receiver for me, but so is DeAndre Hopkins. So careful. I really like that Houston team, probably that Houston stack in general. I liked them last week. Look how that worked out. So I'm not a fortune teller, but I'd like to think this time would be a little bit better.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Please like this video. Please comment, subscribe. Don't forget, Manny is over on at Twitch. He's actually going to be going over there now if you want to check him out over there. Use the sign-up code NFL Strategy. Get 50% off your first month of Osmo Plus. Just go to osmo.com/join. Manny, before we leave, anything else?
No, man. Careful with what you do with the value receivers, Auden Tate specifically. Maybe what you do with Cincy in general. Other than that, I think the slate's pretty wide open. You should feel free to play whoever you want. I think you can make it work pretty easily.
All right, guys. Thank you once again for joining us. We'll see you guys later. Good luck this weekend on the main slate.